The boardroom on the 31st floor of Voss Capital had floor-to-ceiling windows, and on a clear Tuesday morning in March, you could see all the way to Lake Michigan. Fiona Calloway didn't see any of it. Her back was to the view, her eyes were on the man standing in the doorway, and she was done talking. "You're terminated, Mr. Delaney. Security will see you out." Nobody in the room moved. 22 people sat around a table that cost more than most people's annual salaries, and not one of them breathed. The man in the doorway, work boots, gray uniform shirt, the name of a maintenance contractor stitched above the left pocket, just looked at her. No argument, no apology. He nodded once, set his keycard on the edge of the nearest chair, and walked out. No one knew that by 6 o'clock that evening, this man would pull Fiona Calloway's teenage daughter out of a burning car on the expressway. No one knew that in 7 hours, everything Fiona believed about herself was going to crack straight down the middle. If you think you know where this is going, stay until the end, because it's not what you think. Hit like and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. The meeting had started badly before Joel Delaney ever walked through the door. Fiona had been at Voss Capital for 11 years, the last 4 as CEO, and she ran the firm the way she ran everything else in her life, on precision, on discipline, and on the understanding that everyone in her orbit was accountable to the same standard, no exceptions. It was the standard she'd held herself to since she was 23 years old, and the only woman in a room full of men who thought her MBA was decorative. That morning, the quarterly audit presentation was supposed to begin at 9 sharp. By 9:14, the facility's contractor had not yet sent anyone to fix the projector system, a glitch that had been flagged the day before. The entire leadership team was sitting in a room that smelled like fresh coffee and anxiety, staring at a blank screen. "Someone pull the maintenance request," Fiona said, and her assistant Bridget typed fast. "It was assigned to a Joel Delaney. He's on the schedule for 8:50. It's 9:15. "I know." The room waited. At 9:19, the door opened, and Joel Delaney stepped in. He was somewhere in his early 40s, maybe late 30s. It was hard to tell. Dark hair going gray at the temples, the kind of face that had seen weather. He was carrying a canvas tool bag, and he was moving quickly like he'd been running. "Mr. Delaney." Fiona didn't raise her voice. She never raised her voice. "You're almost 30 minutes late." He looked at the room. Something moved behind his eyes. Not guilt, exactly. More like a man who had already run the calculation and accepted the outcome. "I apologize, Miss Calloway. I don't need the reason. This meeting was on your schedule yesterday afternoon. You were given a priority flag. I understand, do you?" She stepped forward. 22 people in this room, legal, finance, operations, 4 board members who flew in from out of state. Their combined time in the last 30 minutes is worth more than your annual contract. Do you understand that? "Yes, ma'am." "Then you understand why I can't have someone on this project who doesn't show up." Joel Delaney didn't plead. He didn't offer another word of explanation. He set the canvas bag down on the floor, very carefully, the way you set something down when you're working hard not to show what you're feeling, and he nodded. "I'll get my things." He picked up the bag and walked out. The projector was fixed by the backup IT team 20 minutes later. The meeting ran long. By noon, Fiona had forgotten his name. Joel Delaney took the elevator down alone. He watched his reflection in the polished steel doors. Tired, that was the word. He'd been tired for 2 years, maybe 3, and some mornings he couldn't remember what not tired felt like anymore. His phone buzzed, his daughter's school. He'd missed the call. He called back while the elevator opened onto the lobby. "Mr. Delaney." The school secretary's voice was the careful kind, the kind trained not to lead with bad news. "This is Riverside Middle. Cora's all right, but there was a situation this morning. She had a pretty bad anxiety episode during first period. She's in the nurse's office. She's asking for you." Joel was already walking toward the exit. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Cora was 12, and she'd been having the episodes for 8 months. Since her mother left and the apartment shrank and Joel's work, hours got longer, and Cora started learning that some nights she was going to have to manage dinner and homework and her own fear by herself. She never complained about any of it. That was the part that kept Joel up at night. He found her in the nurse's office sitting on a cot with her knees pulled to her chest, reading a paperback like she hadn't just scared her homeroom teacher half to death. She looked up when he came in, and the careful expression she'd been holding cracked just slightly. "Hey, Bug! Hey, Dad!" She paused. "You're not at work. I came to get you. You didn't have to, Cora." He sat down next to her. "I know." She leaned against his arm just for a second, the way kids do when they're trying to be older than they are and can't quite manage it. He drove her home, got her settled with soup and her book, called his sister to come stay with her, and by the time he got back to the Voss Capital building to collect his equipment and his final check, It was after 2 in the afternoon. The woman at the HR desk wouldn't meet his eyes. He drove home in the old truck, the one with the cracked dashboard and the rattling back door that he kept meaning to fix. He got halfway down the expressway before he saw it. Fiona Calloway was still in her office at 5:30 when her phone rang. Her personal cell, not the desk line, her ex-husband's number. She let it ring twice before she answered. "What is it, Paul?" "Nadia's in the car." It didn't compute right away, then it did. Their daughter Nadia, 16, confident, too smart for her own good, the exact kind of kid who didn't wait for rides when she could figure out an alternative, had apparently decided to take the car she was not supposed to take, the car she was 6 months away from being legally allowed to drive on her own. "She's fine," Paul said quickly. "She's fine, but there's been an accident. She's on the expressway near the Kimball exit. There was a truck that clipped her. The car went into the median. Fire department is already there." Fiona was standing before he finished the sentence. "Is she hurt?" "Shaken up. Maybe a broken arm." "But Fiona," he paused. "There was a man, a bystander. He was there before anyone else. He got her out of the car before it caught. Before it caught? The engine. It started smoking pretty bad. He pulled her out. Fiona was already in the elevator." The expressway near Kimball was a wall of red and blue lights by the time Paul's driver got her there. She spotted Nadia immediately, sitting on the back bumper of a paramedic truck, a thermal blanket around her shoulders, her left arm wrapped, her mascara in streaks down her face that she was pretending weren't there. Fiona crossed the distance between them and pulled her daughter into a hug that probably hurt Nadia's arm, and neither of them cared. "I'm okay," Nadia kept saying. "Mom, I'm okay. You are going to be grounded until you're 30. I know. I love you. I know that too." A paramedic eventually intervened and made Fiona step back so they could finish the assessment. She stood there on the shoulder of the expressway with the March wind cutting through her coat and the traffic inching past, and asked the nearest officer what happened. "Your daughter got lucky," the officer said. "Car spun into the median, hit pretty hard. Smoke started coming from under the hood pretty fast after that. There was a witness who stopped, had her out before we even arrived on scene. She was about 40 feet from the car when it flashed." "The witness. Where is he?" The officer pointed. "He was sitting on the guardrail about 30 feet away, declining a space blanket from a second paramedic. His jacket was torn at the shoulder. There was a cut on his forearm that the paramedic was clearly trying to bandage while he was clearly trying to wave them off. He was looking at the ground. He hadn't looked toward Fiona or Nadia even once." Fiona walked over. She was 10 feet away when she recognized him. The gray uniform, the dark hair, the particular stillness of someone who had learned not to expect much from the world and had organized his whole posture around that fact. She stopped. Joel Delaney looked up. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Then he said very quietly, "Is she okay? She's okay." Fiona's voice came out smaller than she intended. "The paramedics think her arm is fractured. They want to take her in for x-rays." He nodded, looked back at the ground. "Mr. Delaney." Fiona took another step forward. "You pulled my daughter out of that car. Someone had to. You were injured." He glanced at his arm like he'd briefly forgotten about it. "It's not bad. Let them bandage it. They are." He said it without any particular affect, just a statement of fact. Fiona stood there in the cold and tried to find words for the thing happening inside her chest. She couldn't. She was very good at words in boardrooms and very bad at them everywhere else, and this moment required something she didn't have a name for yet. "You don't have to say anything," Joel said. He wasn't being unkind. He was just stating what appeared to him to be true. "I owe you an apology." He looked at her then, really looked at her the way people do when they're deciding whether something is worth engaging with. "For this morning? Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "You didn't do anything wrong this morning. I was late. You were about to explain why. It wouldn't have mattered." Fiona felt that land somewhere uncomfortable. "You don't know that." Joel looked at her steadily. "Mrs. Calloway, I've worked facilities, maintenance, and contract services for 9 years. I've been fired by people who didn't ask for an explanation more times than I can count. I know when a room has already decided." He paused. "I'm not angry about it. That's just how it goes. It shouldn't go that way. Maybe not." He stood up, carefully. The paramedic protested. He ignored her with the practiced ease of someone used to being in more physical pain than he acknowledged. "But it does. And you've got bigger things to worry about tonight than me." He picked up his jacket from the guardrail, nodded once in the direction of Nadia's ambulance, and started toward the tow truck that was blocking the left lane. "Mr. Delaney," Fiona's voice stopped him. "Let me drive you to the hospital. That arm needs more than field dressing." He turned. "I've got my truck. Your truck is on the shoulder with a cracked headlight. I can see it from here." Something shifted in his expression. Not humor exactly, but the ghost of it. That headlight was already cracked. Please. It wasn't a word Fiona used easily. She heard it come out of her own mouth and registered distantly that she meant it. You got her out of a burning car. Let me at least do this. Joel looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked toward the truck. Then he sighed. Fine, he said. They didn't talk in the car. Fiona's driver took them to Northwestern, and Joel sat in the back seat looking out the window the same way Nadia had looked out windows as a small child, like the whole world outside was a different country. Paul texted that he was already at the ER with Nadia. Fiona relayed the information to nobody in particular. At the hospital, they went separate directions. Fiona found Nadia. Joel found the waiting room. It was 2 hours before the doctors cleared Nadia. A hairline fracture in the radius, a boot cast, 3 weeks of no volleyball, and a very sincere conversation about car keys. And when Fiona came back out into the main corridor, she expected Joel to be gone. He was sitting in a plastic chair reading something on his phone. His arm was properly bandaged now, a real wrap rather than the field tape the paramedic had used. He looked up when he heard her heels on the linoleum. How is she? Fractured radius. She'll be fine. Fiona sat down in the chair across from him because standing over him felt wrong. How's the arm? 4 stitches. Nothing exciting. He set down his phone. She scared you. She scared me half to death. Kids have a way of doing that. Fiona looked at him. You have kids. It wasn't a question. She'd heard something in his voice, the practiced evenness of someone who had refined exactly how worried they were allowed to sound about someone they loved. A daughter, Cora. She's 12. Is she? Fiona paused, recalibrated. Is she home right now? My sister's with her. She had a rough morning. He said it in that same level way, not asking for anything, just placing a fact on the table between them. She's the reason you were late. Joel looked at her. How'd you know that? Because nothing else makes sense. You weren't late for no reason. People who have their whole life organized around showing up, and I could see that in how you walked in, how you set the bag down, how you didn't make a scene. Those people don't just sleep through their alarm. He was quiet for a moment. She had an anxiety episode at school. They called during my drive-in. I went to get her first. He paused. I knew I was going to be late. I knew what it probably meant. But she was sitting in a nurse's office asking for me. Fiona felt something shift under her ribs. If you'd told me, you'd already decided. He said it without accusation, just the same flat honesty he'd been using all evening. I could see it. Once people decide in a room like that, it doesn't help to explain. It just makes you look like you're making excuses. I was wrong. You were running a meeting. I was performing. The words came out before Fiona could stop them. I was making an example. There's a difference. She looked at her hands. There's always a difference, and I don't always notice it until later. Sometimes much later. Joel didn't say anything. He just listened, which turned out to be its own kind of pressure. I'd like to offer you your position back, Fiona said, reinstated, with a formal apology in writing, and I'll speak to the contractor myself. I don't want it. She'd expected that. Then what would help? He thought about it. Genuinely thought about it, which she hadn't expected. Nothing from you. I'll find something else. Then, what would help is if you ran your next meeting differently. How do you mean? When the next person walks in late, and they will, because people's lives don't arrange themselves around your calendar, ask first, that's all. Just ask. He looked at the floor. It takes 30 seconds. It might save someone's job. It might also save you from firing the wrong person. Which you did, by the way. I was good at that job. I know, she said it simply, because it was true, and because the file the contractor had forwarded her when she'd asked, 2 hours ago, from her phone in the waiting room while Nadia was being seen, had been unambiguous. Perfect attendance, except for today. Consistently above average on all assessments. Multiple letters of commendation from building managers. I looked at your record, she said. Something in his posture changed. Not quite stiffening, more like the careful stillness of someone who has learned that being known can go either way. Why? Because I wanted to understand who I'd fired. She looked at him directly, and I learned more about you in 30 minutes than I bothered to learn in 5 years of that contractor working in our building. People don't usually look at the maintenance crew. I know that. I'm embarrassed by it. He was quiet for a long moment. You don't have to be embarrassed. You just have to do better. The hospital around them made its particular nighttime sounds. The intercom, the squeak of rubber-soled shoes, a TV in a distant room. Nadia was somewhere down the corridor with Paul, being lectured about car keys and probably tuning out half of it. Can I ask you something? Fiona said. Sure. When you were on that expressway, when you stopped, did you recognize the car? Did you know it was her? Joel shook his head. I saw a car in the median, smoke coming up, and a kid trapped inside, that's all. So you had no reason. I don't need a reason. He said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. There was somebody who needed help. So, he shrugged and winced at the movement because of his arm. That's it. That's the whole story. Fiona sat with that for a moment. Most people drive past. Most people are scared. That's not a judgment, it's just true. He leaned back in the plastic chair. I spent 4 years in the Army, combat medic. After that, I worked ER trauma for a while. You get to a point where your body moves before your brain figures out whether it wants to. It's not heroism, it's just wiring. That's why you left medicine? The Army? My wife got sick. He said it the way people say things they've said many times, the sentence worn smooth. Cancer. By the time we knew, there wasn't much to do. I came home to be with her and Cora. She died 14 months later. He paused. After that, I needed something with regular hours. Something predictable. Cora needed predictable. Fiona was quiet. What could you say to that? She'd asked a question and he'd answered it honestly, and the answer was the kind that made everything else feel proportionately smaller. I'm sorry, she said. It was 2 years ago. We're managing. Cora is lucky to have you. Cora is the reason I function. He said it without sentiment, just fact. She's the reason I get up and show up every day, even today when today went the way it did. Fiona stood when Paul texted that Nadia was being discharged. She looked at Joel, still sitting in the plastic chair, an ordinary man in a torn jacket who had pulled her daughter out of a burning car because someone needed help and he was the person standing there. Will you let me drive you home? It's late. It's also the least I can do. She paused. Please. Don't make me feel worse about this than I already do. Something in his face shifted, that ghost of humor again, or maybe something closer to actual warmth. That's not a good argument. It's the only one I have left, he considered. Then stood, slowly, one hand briefly pressed to his ribs. Fine. The drive to his neighborhood took 25 minutes. He lived in a building that didn't have a doorman, in an apartment where the light in the hallway was out. He told the driver not to wait at the curb, and when Fiona started to protest, he said, mildly, that he'd been getting himself home for 42 years and he thought he had it down. She laughed. It surprised her. She hadn't laughed she couldn't actually remember. Mr. Delaney, she said as he opened the car door. Joel, he stopped. I meant what I said about doing better. I know that doesn't fix today, but I want you to know I mean it. He looked at her for a moment in the dark. I believe you, he said, and the thing was, he sounded like he did. Not like someone granting absolution, just like someone assessing the situation and finding it credible. Take care of your daughter. I will. She paused. Take care of yours. He nodded once and got out, and she watched him walk into the building, and then the car pulled away from the curb and drove her back toward Lincoln Park, where her apartment had floor-to-ceiling windows and views she was too busy to look at. She didn't sleep that night. She lay in the dark and thought about the audit meeting, about 22 people watching her make an example. She thought about what making an example actually meant, who it served, what it cost. She thought about Joel Delaney setting his canvas bag down with that careful, quiet dignity and not saying another word, not because he had nothing to say, but because he'd already calculated that it wouldn't matter. She thought about Nadia in the median, smoke rising, a stranger running toward the car instead of away from it. She thought about Cora, 12 years old, sitting in a nurse's office with her knees pulled up, asking for her dad. At 4 a.m, she got up and wrote the longest email of her career. It went to her legal team, her HR director, her head of operations, and the contract firm. It was about oversight protocols for service staff, about required acknowledgement procedures before dismissal, about the difference between a policy violation and a judgment call, and about the responsibility of people in positions of authority to slow down. She didn't mention Joel by name. She didn't need to. In the morning, she sent a separate email to the contractor with a formal request that Joel Delaney's record be cleared, that he receive 3 months of severance he hadn't been offered, and that he be given a letter of recommendation from her personally if he ever wanted it. The contractor responded within an hour, agreeing to all of it. Then she sat in her office and stared at the spreadsheets on her screen and thought about what Marcus, her CFO, the one person on the executive team who regularly told her things she didn't want to hear, had said to her once when she'd fired someone else, a long time ago, for a different kind of small mistake. You're not wrong, he'd said, but being right isn't always the same as being just. She hadn't understood it then. She thought she was beginning to. 3 weeks passed. Fiona ran the next Monday meeting differently. When a junior analyst came in 6 minutes late with the look of someone who'd already written their own resignation in their head, Fiona stopped the presentation. What happened? She asked. Just that. The analyst blinked. My son had a fever this morning. I had to find someone to watch him before I could. Okay, Fiona said. Sit down, we'll catch you up. The room was very quiet. Fiona turned back to the screen and continued. She didn't announce it as a change in policy. She didn't send a memo. She just started doing it, and one by one, other people in the building started to notice, the way you notice when something that was always slightly off has been quietly corrected. Marcus noticed. "You're different," he said one afternoon, leaning in her doorway. "I'm trying to be." What happened? She thought about it. "I was shown something, by someone who had no reason to show me anything." Marcus considered this, the maintenance guy, from the expressway. She hadn't told him the details, but Marcus had a way of assembling facts out of negative space. "Yes, you going to do anything about it?" "I already did." She turned back to her screen. "I gave him what I could. He didn't want more. Some people don't." "I know." She paused. "That's the part I keep thinking about." Joel got the letter of recommendation on a Thursday. He read it standing in his kitchen, Cora at the table eating cereal before school. It was 3 paragraphs, and it said things about him that most people had never thought to say out loud, about competence and professionalism and the particular value of people who did hard work quietly. At the bottom, Fiona Calloway had signed it herself. "What's that?" Cora asked, watching him over her spoon. "A letter from someone I used to work with, good or bad." Joel folded it and set it on the counter. "Good. Really good, actually." Cora nodded and went back to her cereal. "Then Dad? Yeah, you seem better lately." He thought about that. He'd taken a new position at a hospital. Facilities manager this time, not contractor, actual staff with benefits and the kind of regular hours that meant he was home when Cora got home and sitting at the table for dinner and able to say, when the school called, that he would be there in 20 minutes. "I think I am," he said. "Good." She carried her bowl to the sink. "You were kind of sad for a while." "I know. I'm sorry about that. It's okay." "You're a good dad, even when you're sad." She grabbed her backpack from the hook by the door, matter of fact in the way of 12-year-olds who have learned to carry more than they should and do it without complaint. "I'll see you after school. I'll be here." She left, and the apartment was quiet, and Joel stood in the kitchen for a moment before he picked up the folded letter and read it one more time. Then he put it in the drawer where he kept the important things. Cora's birth certificate, his discharge papers, a photograph of his wife taken on a beach in Oregon 3 years before she got sick, squinting into the sun, laughing at something he'd said that he couldn't remember anymore. He looked at the photograph for a long moment. "Getting better," he said. In April, Nadia Calloway sent a text to her mother's work email because she'd lost the personal number again, which was going to require a conversation. That said only, "The guy who got me out of the car. Can we invite him to dinner sometime? I want to say thank you properly." Fiona read it twice. Then she forwarded it to her assistant with a note. "Get me Joel Delaney's current contact information, please." The dinner happened on a Saturday in late April at a restaurant that was not the kind of place Joel would ever have chosen, and that he walked into with the careful expression of someone navigating unfamiliar terrain. He brought Cora, who shook Fiona's hand solemnly, and then turned to Nadia and asked whether she'd gotten her cast off yet, which she had, and the two of them were gone to the other end of the table within approximately 4 minutes. Joel and Fiona sat across from each other, and for the first time since the night in the hospital corridor, talked without emergency framing the conversation. He was easier to talk to than she'd expected. Direct in the same way she was direct, but without the armoring she'd spent years building around hers. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He had opinions, sharp ones, offered without apology, and when she disagreed with one, he didn't retreat, just re-argued, and it was so genuinely pleasant that she didn't realize they'd been there for 2.5 hours until Cora appeared at Joel's elbow and said she was hungry enough to eat the tablecloth. Walking out, Nadia fell into step beside Cora and said something that made the younger girl laugh so hard she had to stop on the sidewalk. Joel and Fiona stood a few feet behind, watching. "She's good," Fiona said, meaning Cora. "She is." He said it with a quiet pride that he wasn't trying to suppress. "She's going to be okay. I think she's going to be more than okay. So are you." He looked at her sideways. "Was that in doubt?" "I didn't know. That first night, you seemed very contained. I was in a hospital waiting room at midnight with a stranger who'd fired me that morning." He kept his voice dry. It didn't seem like the right moment for emotional range. She laughed again. It was getting easier. "Fair point." They stood on the sidewalk while their daughter said something about a movie or a park or some plan that was clearly consolidating without any input from the adults. "I've been thinking about something," Fiona said. "That sounds like it could go several directions. The company has been looking at restructuring its in-house facilities and security oversight. The position would involve coordinating all our building operations and emergency preparedness protocols, basically designing systems from the ground up." She looked at him. It's a real role, management level, not because of the expressway. Because you're genuinely qualified and I spent 5 years not noticing. Joel was quiet. You don't have to answer tonight, she said. I just wanted to say it out loud, officially, without, guilt in the way. He considered that for a moment. Is the guilt gone? Mostly. It got lighter once I actually did something about it instead of just feeling it. He nodded slowly. I'll think about it. That's all I'm asking. Cora appeared and grabbed Joel's arm to show him something on her phone. He looked, raised his eyebrows, said something Fiona couldn't hear that made Cora groan dramatically, and then both of them were laughing. Nadia materialized at Fiona's side. I like them, she said, with the serene certainty of a 16-year-old who has made up her mind. I know. Fiona watched Joel and Cora on the sidewalk, this small ordinary family who had learned to make do and keep going and show up even when the world had not been particularly kind about showing up for them. I like them too, she said. He took the job in June. The first week he came in at 8:50 and the security desk logged his arrival without incident. Nobody made a thing of it. He had an office now, small, facing the elevator bank rather than the window, which was fine, and a team of 6, and the particular quiet authority of someone who knew exactly what they were doing and had been given, at last, the room to do it. On his third day, a junior contractor was 20 minutes late to a facilities check. Joel found her in the lobby, braced for the conversation, and said simply, "Everything okay?" She blinked. "My kid had a thing. I'm sorry, I can make up the don't worry about it." He walked toward the elevator. "Come on, I'll show you where we're starting." She followed, still slightly off balance, still expecting something that didn't come. He didn't announce it as policy. He didn't send a memo. He just did it. Because it was the right way to run a team, because it was the thing that would have cost nothing and changed everything on a Tuesday morning in March, and because somewhere between a burning car on the expressway and a hospital waiting room and a restaurant table where 2 girls were already planning their next meeting, he had decided that the thing you'd needed most, when nobody gave it to you, was exactly what you owed the next person. Nothing more, nothing less. Just ask, just listen, that's all.